As a little bit of a precursor, about 2 months ago, Chief Pasternak approached me and asked if we would share our experiences at the SCRD with the SIB, with the nation, about how we're handling certain issues at the regional district. It's a sharing of information. I know that you've done a lot of work on these issues already, and we certainly want to hear your experiences as well as us giving you ours. We're going to leave you with a few things, some policies. Those 3 issues, by the way, were the province has initiated a new bullying and harassment policies in the workplace, and that applies to both staff and council. So these rules now are ensconced in the BC WorkSafe regulations. In fact, that's where the policy comes from. So it's very important that we understand the width and breadth of those of that legislation, and it calls specifically to do a number of steps that the organization is responsible for making sure everybody's aware of it. And the first person I'll introduce is Lindsay Stoker, not quite yet, our HR officer. And the second topic was to talk about our outreach program to the community. The board has put a fair amount of effort in and staff effort in to develop a process of how we engage our communities over a range of issues. And of course, as you're well aware, not one approach works for every situation. You have to have a fluid series of options available to you to be able to make that connection with your public. And Julie Clark, I made sure I wrote this down because she's got a really interesting title. Julie Clark, she's our Sustainability and Education Coordinator. So I'll let them get into that part, but I just wanted to emphasize the importance of this to us. Is that really important for my board, and it's in their strategic plan that we do outreach, that we do meet with other organizations to share stories, to share experiences, and collaborate on issues that are important to us. And I think these are 2 really important and current issues that we're broaching with our organization, with our community. So I think it's really great that we have this opportunity to talk to you, hear your stories, and you get to hear our stories. So again, I'm trying to preface it. It's not a one-way street. We want to hear from you as well.
I'm Lindsay Stoker, as John mentioned. I'm the HR officer at the SCRD, and maybe we can just go around and have introductions and your role.
Yeah, I would give a question to the council member of the Seashell Nation.
Okay.
Randy Joe, council member of the Seashell Nation.
Sid Quinn, I'm the resource director, and we look at the various environmental issues.
Keith Reynolds, I'm the human resources director.
Way back there.
Michael Morgan, communications.
Hello.
Brent Jones, I'm the Administrative Service Division Manager.
Hello.
Jesse August, Director of Lands and Economic Development.
Vicki McFarland, Chief Operations Officer for the Sanko Group of Companies.
Leslie Miller, Director of Finance.
Peter Jermaine, SIGD Manager.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I'm here today to speak to what the SCRD has done regarding policy updates to existing discrimination and harassment policies. So I'm going to circulate ours right now for you to have a look at. So just have a read over. I know it's quite lengthy. So I've been asked to be here today to share with you what we've done in terms of implementing steps that have been legislated by WorkSafe to include bullying, specifically into the harassment policy. So as of November 1st, 2013, employers are required to update existing policies to include specifics on bullying, outlining what bullying is, a definition, and also outline a process in terms of how to address it and report it. So if you look on page 5, we have actually outlined the steps in order to take to address bullying and harassment in the workplace. Under this legislation, the employers are also, they also have the responsibility of educating employees. So what we've done at SCRD, specifically myself and HR, we've gone to every single work group and just kind of tapped onto their staff meetings and circulated the new policy, and obviously shared with them the importance of this, and shared a little video with them and answered any questions that they might have. and understanding that bullying can be somewhat gray. It's a difficult subject, and so we went to each work group. I thought it would be easier to meet with small groups and also just have any feedback from them and answer any questions. We're also legislated as employers to educate our managers and supervisors on how to deal with these things. So we've actually just done that. A couple weeks ago, John, we had the lady come up from BC Fed, and we provided 2 sessions, 2 8-hour sessions to our managers and supervisors on how to address bullying and harassment. You know, as supervisors and managers, you are legally responsible to follow these, and there could be financial impacts if that isn't followed. So that's also a big part of it as well. WorkSafe has a fantastic website, huge resource that I spent quite a lot of time on. They have a toolkit which has basically a blank policy that you can kind of fill in the gaps. I'm happy to share our policy, so we're not reinventing the wheel. I'm happy to share that with you electronically. Yes?
I have a question for you about the harassment stuff. Does it also go outside of the work area? Like I'm talking about like Facebook comments and stuff, because I'm just skimming.
Yeah, social media, obviously, it's a big part of every day, and so it does include that, as well as, you know, one of the questions that I got at my work groups was, so what about the public? And they too are just as responsible as coworker to coworker. But social media is also, you know, quite out there, and again, bullying is kind of a gray area, but this video that I'm about to show you kind of outlines what is and what isn't bullying. And
it seems like everyone is talking about bullying and harassment. But what does it mean for you and your workplace? This video explains what workplace bullying and harassment is and what it's not. Legal obligations for employers, supervisors, and workers. And where to get the information you need. So first off, what is workplace bullying and harassment? It includes any inappropriate conduct or comment by a person towards a worker that the person knew or reasonably ought to have known would cause that worker to be humiliated or intimidated. Examples could be yelling or name-calling, vandalizing personal belongings, harmful hazing or initiation practices. There might be a single perpetrator or a group. There may be just one target or many. Bullying and harassment can occur between co-workers or between the employer and a worker. Or it can come from external sources, such as members of the public, clients and customers, or workers from other organizations. Bullying and harassment also extends to online activities. Cyberbullying can occur through email, text messages, social networks, and other websites. What is not considered workplace bullying and harassment? Managers and supervisors have many responsibilities. Decisions relating to job duties, workloads, deadlines, and performance management, or the direction of workers and the workplace are not bullying and harassment. So what are your legal duties? Employers have an obligation to take reasonable steps to prevent bullying and harassment, or minimize it where possible. Employers must also develop a policy statement that addresses bullying and harassment in the workplace. Develop and implement procedures for reporting incidents or complaints, and for how they will be dealt with. They also have to train supervisors and workers. Supervisors and workers are required to comply with the employer's policies and procedures and not engage in workplace bullying and harassment. Workers must report it when they see it or experience it. The bottom line is, bullying and harassment is a workplace hazard that poses a risk to the health and safety of workers. As part of their responsibility to protect workers' safety, WorkSafe BC prevention officers will inspect workplaces to determine if employers have taken reasonable steps to prevent and address bullying and harassment. The occupational health and safety policies explain what WorkSafe BC considers to be reasonable steps for employers to take. When bullying is reported, it gives employers an opportunity to take positive action. Put an end to workplace bullying and harassment. An online toolkit is available that includes helpful information and advice. For the resources you need, visit worksafebc.com/bullying.
Thanks for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm...
Yeah, I got a question. When the person reports it, does that go under like a whistleblowing policy? Because there's always seemed to be like backlash when you're telling on someone, and you can, in some areas you can get fired for it.
Yeah.
Screaming out at somebody.
I know that's a big hurdle to overcome, and I think through education and terms of confidence for people to address that and come forward when that sort of situation happens. I think basically education is the key there, and just educating people that that's not okay and that behavior shouldn't be tolerated. But I appreciate that. I've heard that before. That I don't want to get in trouble, and I don't want them to find out. And a lot of the time, these complaints that if it were to go to, if that was the last alternative, was to go to the WorkSafe, that they are usually confidential in nature, not all the time. Depends on something. Any other questions?
I guess in a government situation, if an employee was having problems, let's say it was a director or a board director for harassment, what steps would that employee take? Because he would go to the supervisor or to you or to HR?
Yeah, the complaints, I mean, the step one here is obviously you always try and work it out yourself. That's not always the case, that's not always possible. But it would absolutely go like through our policy, and you can log doors specifically how you wish, but our first step is to go to the HR manager, HR department.
And same thing, if a public person had a problem with the staff member, they would go to the HR?
Yeah, that's how our policy works, yeah. And everyone can tailor their policy as they need to, but that is kind of our first step before we go to WorkSafe. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.
So can I ask, if somebody's not satisfied, if they make a complaint that bullying or harassment is happening and they're not satisfied with the outcome, can they go directly to WorkSafe BC?
Yep, that's happened before. I've heard in Vancouver, people just went right to WCB, and that's certainly their right to do that. If they feel it's at a level where they need to go there, they can. Ultimately, we always try and resolve something internally if we can. It's the best case scenario, but that's not always possible. But I have heard of a few cases that has happened. It depends on the severity of it.
Do you also provide, is it in the policy or is it another policy for assistance? Some things with bullying and harassment can lead to a program where you need to seek some help.
Yep.
Right, because you look at some of the cases online where people have been committed suicide.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we, if there's ever a complaint that comes into us, we have an employee and family assistance program, EFAP. So that's always, as you know, that's always kind of there for them to use if they feel that is needed, and it's always a good thing to source that. Absolutely.
My name is Julie Clark, and I work with the Sunshine Coast Regional District with two main hats. And you may initially think those two main hats are not connected, but I hope I can show you a little bit that they are. So I do sustainability work for the regional district, namely the sustainability planning side of things and the implementation of our sustainability plan. And I also am responsible for some education work from the regional district and also some community engagement work. And we're in the early stages of growing that community engagement work. And I've been learning over the last couple of years since my position has been created that in order to do great sustainability work, we have to do really great community engagement work. And so I get the sense, but I don't know for sure, that you may also be thinking about some community engagement work. And so if this is an opportunity to learn and share, please feel free to stop me if there's something that's not clear as I'm going along. I'm going to speak pretty generally about our corporate community engagement program, or at least as to where it's evolved to today. It's still in the process of growing and evolving. And I'm just going to start with what is it? We hear a lot these days, and you've mentioned a few of the tools already: social media, being out in the public and hearing from people. We have a responsibility as public servants and as governing bodies to learn from and hear from and make responsible decisions on behalf of our communities. And so in that role, we must find ways to both communicate with our communities, but also engage with them. And we've been learning over the last couple of years definitely about the difference between those two roles. And communications, namely being sort of that one-way push of information, where you have information that you absolutely must share with your community. It's not information that you're looking for feedback on or consultation about. It's just sort of an update about where you're at. Maybe it's a change in timing or rules or an event that you need to let your community know about. But the sort of additional side of that is, how do we connect with our community? How do we learn more about what our community needs? How do we build smart programs and smart decisions that really are responsive to our communities and taking a leadership role in our communities? And so we've long had a communications department and staff within our organization, and like I said, we're slowly growing our ability to know how to do good engagement work and connect with our communities up and down the coast. We know that in the Sunshine Coast Regional District, we are a community of communities, and each of those communities are quite different in what they need, in what they expect of us, but there are also many similarities. We have lots of common ground, and we provide services to many of those different communities. So in terms of the engagement side of what we do, we build on an international standard which comes from the International Association for Public Participation. So that is a professional association that many people in my role belong to. And this spectrum that you see up there, I'll send you the link to it because I know that the type is very small. But the spectrum of engagement basically asks of your staff or of you, each time you want to connect with your community, what is your purpose and how deeply do you want to connect with them? So you'll see here on the left-hand side of that spectrum at the top, it says inform. It's more what I was talking about a minute ago. Your communications staff do a lot of that work, informing. So that's your ads in the paper, your one-way blasts of information out to the community. But as soon as you move a little bit further to the right-hand side of that spectrum, that really is the engagement work. It's where you're looking to beyond inform, it's where you're looking to consult your community, involve them a little bit more in decision making or perhaps program development. Maybe you're looking to move even further than that. You want to work together as a team to come up with a solution of some kind that you're looking for. Or one step beyond that, even perhaps you're wanting to put decision-making power in the hands of a particular community group or in the hands of your community to make a decision about one particular thing. So every time we go out to the community, whether it's a large process or a small process, we've been working with our staff to help articulate exactly why are you going to engage and how far into that process, how deeply do you want to engage, so that we make sure our promises to the public or our commitments to our communities are very clear, how that information is going to be used. That helps us be very transparent in our decision-making process, but also helps our community members understand exactly what role they can play and what they can expect in terms of if they're going to put the time and energy, whatever resources they have into participating, they have a sense for what they're going to get out of it. Where is that feedback going to show up? How are they really going to be able to influence decision making? It's really important for us to be clear before we start one of those processes that people understand what actually is their ability to influence here. So any questions? Yeah.
Question on who decides within the SCRD, if I was just elected as a director and I was still the alternate, but I still didn't know this. Who decides the level of engagement?
Yeah, really great question. So the question, in case everybody didn't hear, is who decides the level of engagement? And it's a really great question. As you know, our staff team operates at so many different levels within the organization, so it really depends on the scope of what we're engaging about. So if it's a very high level corporate initiative, the senior team would be involved in articulating the goals and the level of engagement. Occasionally our board tells us, we really want you to do engagement at this level. But often it's a very operational type decision where the staff say, we know we need to find out X, or we know we need to get some information about Y. And so staff would be the ones, the technical staff, involved in articulating exactly what those goals are and what level of kind of corresponding engagement to implement or design.
Just add a little bit to that.
Yeah.
You touched on this, to flesh it out a little bit. When we did our Parks Rec Master Plan, that whole process went back to our board for endorsement, and that included the outreach program, because it was such a huge project that really involved all parts of the community. It involved an advisory group, it involved a huge report at the end of it, making, I think, close to 100 different recommendations. So again, just what Julie's saying, it depends on the issue. If it's a smaller issue, it's generally a smaller process. If it's a huge issue, you'll probably involve your politicians, and of course you'll be able to do the template, right? And then you bring it forward and get them to comment on it. But all of that is included in this toolkit, which has been approved by the board.
John's alluded to some specific tools, and I am going to speak to them in a little bit, just so that you know. So what are the reasons I'm interested in hearing from you? What are the reasons that you might be interested in doing community engagement? Or why would the organization consider doing community engagement? What would be in it for you?
Education.
To learn from your community? Great. Yeah.
Sometimes to get buy-in through that education, finding what the issues are, making sure we're either identifying how the policy addresses those issues, if it's a policy we're implementing, or learning what issues are that we might want to consider in developing a policy so that when ultimately it's approved and implemented, we've got buy-in.
Yeah. Buy-in, learning. Other people sometimes articulate that as trust building. So you're showing your community where you're at. You're testing sometimes your assumptions about what you think the community might be after, and then you have the opportunity to learn, oh, there's something we missed along the way. Anything else?
About transparency. We always get that concern from people in the community that we're not transparent or we're not transparent. And I think that's always something that looks at. And accountability.
Excellent. Great, thank you. Any others? Those are all great reasons.
Do you have a hard copy of the previous page that you can leave?
Yes, absolutely. Or I can send to you. Yeah.
Can I ask another question? What is the most effective, in your experience, what is the most effective way of engaging? It seems different. We have community open houses or community meetings, on web pages, surveys.
Yeah.
What would be the most effective? Because that's something that we want to concentrate on. What is the most effective way of getting the information out there and getting feedback? Because a lot of times when you have our community meetings, people who have a gripe are the ones that come out.
That's right. Great. So the question is, what's the most effective way of engaging with people? And the very short answer is it depends on why you're looking to engage and what you hope to accomplish by the end of it. But by going through the process each time of asking yourselves, why are we going to engage? What are we hoping to learn? Or what are we looking to achieve buy-in about? Who are we really trying to reach? Most often it's not the group of people who show up every time because you know they're going to show up. Most often it's another group of people or maybe a series of groups of people who you know you need to connect with who you're not hearing from. And so really this process is a lot about inquiring first and doing some really smart design work of why am I going out? Who am I trying to reach? And usually by the time of answering those two questions very well, when you take some time with your technical team and your people who do the people work in your organization, you will easily come up with what are the best tools. Because once you've done the work of who is the audience we're really trying to connect with, then the next step is really how do we best reach them? Where do they show up? Do they show up on social media? Do they show up at band meetings? Do they show up in the coffee shop down the road? Do they show up with the dog walking group up that way? Where do they show up? And then, so I guess I'll back up one step and say, the engagement program that we're building at the SCRD is very much based on, in the sort of theory around this work, is called a community development approach. And basically what that means is you go to where the people are. So rather than, it's such a basic thing, but rather than create, say, a town hall meeting and try and get everybody to come to you when it might be an issue that might not call that many people in, how could you go to where people already gather and pitch them a question or show them a video or inquire a little bit more about how that particular piece resonates with them? And so it's not a sort of direct silver bullet type answer to your question about what's the most effective way, but I think in summary the most effective way is one that absolutely connects with the specific audience you're trying to reach. So it's a tailored approach each time, but as you move through this process a few times you realize there are elements that you don't have to be a part of every process. The communication side of getting the word out about where you're going to be, designing great questions so that you can interface with people in a meaningful, relevant way to them. And then what other venues or mechanisms or methods do you need to use to do that? What do your staff need in order to do that well? Those are the kinds of things that flow next. What are the risks of not doing community engagement work? You've hinted at them in your responses. I mean, transparency has a backside to it, the buy-in has a backside to it. So what are the risks of not connecting with your community, not learning from them on a regular basis?
The people are uninformed.
Yeah, uninformed, perhaps mistrustful. It's a common thing for mistrust of government, whatever level of government that is. So it's something we know we're up against all the time. And, something we try and do on a regular basis is just simply put faces and names to the people who are part of government on the Sunshine Coast to help address that. Any other risks of not doing engagement?
A breakdown of the system, right?
Say a little more.
You just let it go, it just gets worse and worse, right? Nobody's going to fix it. So.
Yeah, so things just kind of build on each other.
Bully ends up running the show.
Interesting, thank you.
I think on a practical level, I guess, you invest a lot of money in pushing forward a process. If it's not complete, huge investment goes down the drain if you end up getting that resistance back from the public. And if you look at our governance at even provincial and federal level, recently the First Nations Education Act put on hold basically because I don't think everybody had buy-in. And that, to me, points to process. There's a big cost to that.
Yeah, that's a great summary. From a staff time kind of perspective in the industry, or profession where I spend a lot of time, the current stats are 1 hour invested up front saves 9 hours on the back end. In terms of if a process goes sideways or you haven't engaged completely with your community, that's some of the risk in terms of actual expenditures on staff time and probably stress for staff as well. Those kinds of things. Stress? We don't have any stress. What's that? So here's the kinds of things that we've been asking ourselves over the last little while as we've been building an engagement program. What does our organization need? So if we're kind of thinking at the corporate level, board level, our senior team, what do they need in order to put some resources behind a program like this? And then also, what are the specifics that our staff need in order to do this well? Because, you know, by and large in local government, there's a few roles that have engagement kind of built in, but not a lot of roles when you look across the board that have this kind of specific training. So what more do our staff need? Yep.
I think one of the staff needs is the support from people above in order to carry out their work, to provide not just that engagement side, but the technical side, to make sure that, you know, whether you're trying to operate within a budget, other constraints. So somebody can get maybe lost in or get not lost but confused in political messaging.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Here's the kinds of things that, it's going to be really small, so don't worry so much about what's on the right-hand side, but look at this column down the left-hand side. Here's the basics of the corporate engagement program that we've put together so far. Like I said, it's still kind of growing and evolving, but these are the main pieces that we are seeing the need for in our organization right now. So at the very top, this is kind of the flow from the high level down to the on-the-ground stuff. An engagement policy that is corporate-wide is something that we've just completed for the SCRD that kind of spells out what the expectations are within the organization if you're doing engagement work, but it also spells out for the community what they can expect of us each time we take on a project. So it helps to outline some consistency that's needed so that in an organization that is as big as yours or ours, we're doing things consistently across different departments, which is sometimes a challenge. And then the next piece is, the strategy piece is connecting back really to the why. Why are you doing it? And that might be a big why of why are you doing it for the whole organization, but once it gets down to the department or the project level, it's going to be a smaller, more specific why. We've realized over time in chatting with other staff who are out and about or in the field, one of the things we know about our community is that our role is not always clear. And so having heard this a few times in a few different places, we thought, well, from the strategy perspective, we need to do some better work about helping our community understand who we are, what we do, and what we don't do. It took us a long time to get to that synthesis, who we are, what we do, and what we don't do. And it sounds so similar now after we've gone through the process of mapping out really maybe where some confusion was, maybe where we get questions that show up over and over and over again. You start to see patterns of what might be missing in your community. So we've done the starting point of some work around a strategy behind our engagement. Say for this year, what do we want to accomplish by the end of the year? Where do we really need to put our resources around doing engagement? And then the next pieces are a lot more specific. What are the training and kind of coaching needs in order to have staff really well supported, like you were saying, Sid? What are the specific tools that the organization needs to have? Is that a series of fact sheets about how to do this process and that process? Is a series of webinars or little toolkits that people can get their hands on to make it easy and relevant if they're in the planning department or they're in the recreation department, or to make it useful in the context where each of our staff people work. And then finally, it's unfortunate that the evaluation piece shows up at the end. It really should show up in every single element of this program, because every step of the way we're encouraging our staff to ensure we're feeding back to a team that's kind of watching over how this process unfolds, so that if we need to shift, adapt, change things along the way, we're staying connected about that, and that feedback is not getting sort of lost in space somewhere or staying with only one department, which is probably. By way of example, I thought I would just share, the last time I was here to visit with some of your team was when I was doing the community consultation for the sustainability plan for the Sunshine Coast, of which your land use plan is a big part. And that engagement process, I think, was really one of the processes that propelled us towards developing this engagement program where we are right now, in part because it was such an extensive and kind of exhaustive process. So by way of example, how this all gets put together on the ground, the regional sustainability plan is a plan for the Sunshine Coast that has 13 different areas of focus in it, which span social, cultural, economic, and environmental. So it's a plan with many different areas, content areas, to get feedback on. And so as an example of a community development approach in action, we created a 15-person team who were responsible for the development of this plan. So, you know, connecting back to what Keith said earlier, sometimes it's about creating buy-in right from the beginning. We created the team who were going to create the plan, and that team were from organizations up and down the coast, not just the Sunshine Coast Regional District. So the very foundations of how we did the beginning work was with the community and the people who were going to have the biggest impact in implementing the actions. And so they then became the people who were responsible, in part, for doing the engagement work with their own organizations to get feedback on what was included in this plan. And then
I really appreciate when I was at the board, when this came up, what caught my interest was something that we don't do as an organization, is that we don't sit down after we do an engagement and do a report card of what worked and what didn't work. And that's something that we need to focus on, so we can all sit together as a team. This worked, this didn't work, so how do we improve it? And go to where people are. When we were doing the open houses for the power project, we didn't get as many people out as we wanted to. We did on the first night, but then we go to where people are. So the director, I had soccer practice that night. I coach our men's team, so he gave me a whole handful of information packets, so I handed one out to everybody before we started our practice. And it actually worked.
I didn't know about the report card. Is that a standard tool that you have, or maybe talk just briefly about that?
I think what you're referring to was at the end of the process on the consultation here, because this was such a brand new project for this community overall. We implemented a region-wide plan in under a year because of the community development approach, I think, that we took with the consultation. We wanted to make sure that our board really understood the breadth and depth of the engagement work that we had done. And so we took the board at that time a very large report about how extensive all the feedback that came during this process, did our best to summarize it up front, but then gave them all the details in case they wanted to go back through at that level. And so at this point in time, we don't have a report card per se. That was a great report, like a greatly sized report that went along with this when it went to our board. But what we have done since is one of the tools that has come out of this policy piece is that we built a template for our staff to use when they're working through the process of articulating goals, target audience, methods, that sort of thing. And the very back end of that process is an evaluation sort of I guess, hub, if you will, where you track all the feedback that came and any sort of spin-off stuff that's happened as a result of that. And then it gives you the tools to start summarizing the trends that you're seeing as a result of that feedback. Yeah. So it has given our staff, I think, a better ability to track where they're seeing the results of their engagement before we didn't do that.
Actually, a comment and a couple of questions. I wanted to say thank you very much for the presentation, and John, your comments as well. Filling out the circle of strategic planning, operational planning, the budget process, because I think that we certainly could use some tightening up in that area as well. And again, going back to the more recent discussion about communication, the encoding of information that you're trying to get out, and then receiving that feedback from people that are supposedly receiving it, is also an important part of that planning process as well, within the strategic plan and the operational plans for departments. So thank you very much, I really appreciate that. At what point do you deal with such issues? I guess when you're putting information out, are you already filtering the information for the best sort of outcome on projects that you've, like, there's always, with your project, you're looking at a particular path, and there's always unintended consequences to the path and the choices that you're making. Is that dealt with internally, and then the decision is made that, yeah, we're prepared to take those chances? Do we only put out information to make sure that the project gets buy-in from the community?
Do you want to first crack at that?
Sure. In my experience so far, we must make available all the information associated with the project. Typically when we are, as staff, when we're making reports to our board, that tends to be, I get the sense that you're asking about sort of a hot issue type scenario.
Well, yeah, there's always a component to pretty much every project that may not be palatable to everyone. So I guess my question is, do you bury it, or do you make that information available to the public?
This is sort of beyond the scope of communications and engagement specifically, but in our staff reports to the board when decisions like this are happening, we typically are asked to put forward options to our board. And so, John, you'll jump in here and help me out, but typically when I've had to take forward decisions, I put to our board, here's the best case scenario from staff's technical expertise, whether that's something that's specifically technical or whether it's engagement related. Here's the best case option, here's the next option, here's the next option, here's the pros and cons about each of them. It's been, in my experience so far, the approach of our leadership team to put options before the board and let them weigh the pros and cons. Staff may put forward a preferred option, but usually there are a multitude of options for them to decide from. So information doesn't get buried, it's all there and accessible in a really transparent way otherwise. Thank you so much. If you do have other questions, by all means take a card and feel free to get in touch. I really appreciate the opportunity to exchange. Oh, and there are also copies of the engagement policy up here.